We're preparing for the first day, 2019-2020. When I was thinking about that this morning, I thought, 2020, where did that come from? Especially for those of us who started teaching in the 80s. It's always exciting as we prepare, as we get ready for staff and students, as we think about our leadership, and we think about the conditions that we will create in each and every one of our schools. So we celebrate leadership. We celebrate you. We celebrate the work that we do together. And we start every time we meet with that sense of gratitude, because we probably don't have an opportunity to say that enough. And when the busyness of the year comes upon us, and when the challenges that we face are hitting us, we sometimes don't have those opportunities. So I do want to start the year by thanking you for all that you do and all that you are. I also know that some in this room would not have been in the position of vice principal and principal when we were here last year at the very same time. I got to greet the new principals and vice principals last week, and I'd like all of you who are new to the role to please stand so we can acknowledge you. I shared this with the new principals and vice principals last week, and I'll share this with all of us. My message was, we do not do this work alone. In fact, we cannot do this work alone. And the community of leaders in TDSB will look after one another, will support one another, will be there for one another. And I trust that you and all of us will be there, most particularly for those who are new to the role, but also for all of us. Our context. It's always important to speak about the context we're leading in. And yes, there have been many changes over the last little while that have caused challenge. We know that we have gone through a significantly challenging budget process that you're aware of. And the implications of that process will be ones that we will all have to face together and to figure out creative ways to continue to provide the service that we provide. We also know, as John and Ralph mentioned, that in the next while we are dealing with the concept of negotiations. And again, we're always optimistic, but we know that that could bring some realities for us to face. And the day-to-day work that we do in education, because it's a human enterprise, is never static. Human relationships are always complex. Figuring out how to lead and how to relate is always front and center in our minds. That's change. And change can be difficult. But I also wanted to stress that in the context of that change, some things will remain stable. Our multi-year strategic plan remains stable, transforming student learning, creating a culture of well-being, building strong relationships, effective partnerships, using our resources wisely, ensuring access for our students. Those important pillars of the multi-year strategic plan remain front and center. They guide our work as a system, but the significant work that you do at school, in your context, with your community, is what makes the most important matter. And that's, again, where your significant work comes in. The vision for learning remains stable. I know that we're deepening the commitment, but we've been saying for 4 years now, shared leadership, enhanced learning cultures, focused improvement, equity that drives achievement and well-being. Again, our hope is that when you're working with your community, you're getting feedback around are they experiencing shared leadership? Those of us in the formal position of leadership may not always know how those we're leading with are feeling or experiencing that sense of shared leadership in our community. How are we putting the critical questions on the table? The ones that we really don't have easy answers for. And how do those questions become the foundation for the inquiry we do each and every day? And focused improvement. We define achievement in a certain way, deep learning, global competencies, literacy and numeracy. We define well-being in a certain way, specific to your student census data. And most importantly, we define equity in a certain way, which is looking very closely at the adults in the room, individually, collectively, and not forgetting that systemic processes and structures create cultures that sometimes need to be changed or all students will not achieve, which is our core commitment. Those aspects of the vision for learning remain the same. I trust, though, that when you compare the work you were doing 4 years ago to the work that you're doing now, it may feel different because we've moved to deeper places. School improvement remains our #1 lever for change, and in a time of reduced resources, I will be working diligently with the Board of Trustees, with senior team, and with you to keep our #1 commitment alive that I shared with you 4 years ago when I arrived, which was we have to remain focused. We cannot accomplish everything. We cannot overwhelm our communities with too many initiatives, and that each school needs to own that improvement process. One very significant additional request is that we are explicit in how we are involving our parents, our community, our staff, and students in the school improvement process. And we'll be sharing some resources and supports with you shortly on how to strengthen that commitment. In the context of our school improvement work, we're still holding up key drivers that challenge streaming. Let me remind that the reason why we're challenging the concept of streaming is because we have been explicit, we have committed to the fact that we have to change student trajectories. When they have what they need, reading and math in the early years. When we provide the most inclusive learning environment possible for their success. When we pay close attention to who's being suspended and why. And when we drive toward an academic program for all students, we know the result. Our graduation rate speaks to about 86% now. But there are 14% that we actually have to pay attention to. And even within that larger number, we still have to ensure that we are providing the supports that students can get to great places post us. A couple comments about how we define our focus areas. You've heard me use the term deep learning a lot, and I'm going to use a very specific phrase to define what I mean by that, and certainly many have written about it. The simple question I ask is, are the learning opportunities we're inviting our students to engage in the type of learning opportunities that allow them to change the world? Change our community? Change our school? Is the learning allowing them to engage in a process of transformation that they have voice, that they have choice, and that the curriculum expectations are engaged and embedded in a way that allows students to really be excited to come to school? Lots of data says that where that's happening in classrooms, students are more engaged, teachers are more engaged, staff is more engaged. We challenged some really tough data around well-being last year, and it's going to continue. Our students are telling us that they feel that they don't belong, that they don't always know who to turn to. They're telling us that they're stuck on their screens, and they choose their screens sometimes over their friends. Parents are reaching out to us and saying, can you help us because we're not sure what to do, because we can't help our students put the phone down. I understand we can't take care of everything and we must partner with parents and others, but the concept of what is it our students need to be well is so important and remains front and center. And our commitment to equity, anti-oppression, anti-racism remains front and center. You know, this is probably, in my 33 years of education, the most profound opportunity and challenge I have ever faced as a leader, to really try to lead in a way that brings about the kind of equity we're speaking about now. The reason why it's so challenging is because it's really uncomfortable. And it's really scary. Because we don't always know what to do, and we don't always know what to say. And I understand, because some of you have shared this with me, that there's a fear that you might land yourself in difficult waters and not know how to swim. But at the end of the day, we have a commitment that requires that we create the space where the adults, as I said earlier, challenge ourselves, removing barriers, challenging bias, understanding privilege, knowing our identities in relationship to the identities of those in our community, and understanding what we might not know because of who we are, and how we have to create the space to learn. When we lead in a fast-paced, social media-driven world, we're not always given the luxury of that space to learn. And the challenge becomes greater because it's not just about the learning process. Those who have felt harmed by our system are asking for an accountability. That is the very important waters that we are in, and this commitment remains firm. You've heard us speak briefly, but we will be speaking more completely about our equity leadership competencies. What we've done is taken the Ontario Leadership Framework, and instead of adding equity as something on the side, which unfortunately can be the case, we've embedded into that framework how we're defining this important work. More to come on that in the September days, and I'll be tweeting something out, and we will be emailing something out to you later today. In June, we shared with you our expected practices for understanding and dealing with discrimination. We know that we need to provide more support in this area. We know that we need to communicate with our parents so they understand what we're talking about. And most importantly, we need to learn from our students. Again, you may ask, why are we doing this? What is the change? And what it boils down to is we're accepting a very important fact, that too often, depending upon our own experience, we may actually miss examples and experiences of discrimination, racism, hate. And you may say, well, how could we miss it? And this is probably the greatest learning that I've had in the last little while. Too often, we may think that something is simply a conflict or a challenge and needs to be mediated. The trouble is, if there are issues of discrimination that are a part of that situation, and I maybe have never experienced that kind of discrimination, so I'm not seeing it, that becomes the challenge that needs to be transformed. So all we're asking at the first steps of this, and I trust we're going to continue to get strong, is learning how to name it, reaching out for help, and getting people around the table that can assist us so that we can bring about appropriate changes where required. This quote has always challenged me since I read it last spring from Paul Gorski. Students experiencing racism, and frankly any type of discrimination, can't wait for schools to move at their own pace and comfort level. I know this is uncomfortable work, but we can't move at a pace that causes harm. And you know we've been talking about it's not about intention, it's about impact for the last while. Ijeoma Olowu also challenged me this summer when I read her book. What makes microaggressions micro isn't their impact, it's because they are treated by society as nothing. Too often, we hear that an issue or an event or an experience that is not received well by someone, and we say they're overreacting. They don't know what they're talking about. I don't see it that way. What she's taught me is, how are we creating the space as leaders to hear another's perspective and to actually be changed by that perspective? And how are we reaching out for that kind of guidance from peers and colleagues so that we can truly learn? Because, of course, microaggressions are something. And too often when we've been dealing with these issues over the last while, and I know you know me well by now, I go candidly right at them. And let's keep talking honestly. Too often we might say, well, isn't racism where we actually see two people harming each other verbally, physically, doing some egregious action that of course we would never ignore? And I trust no one would ever ignore that. But the difficulty is those things that aren't that noticeable, that are part of the systemic structures that we live and work in, that we, some of us, may be simply accustomed to. And asking the questions in a way that really invites the responses and then doing something with those is key. Michael Saver and Tina Lopez do some really significant work with us, and they've talked to us about important norms that can be used when we are engaging in these kinds of conversations. We've asked you to facilitate these kinds of conversations with your staff. Do we have the courage and wisdom to recognize our connection and value our differences? Do we adopt a stance of wonder rather than judgment? Do we befriend disagreement and discomfort? Do we recognize and understand how my identity affects what I know and my relationships? Do we challenge with respect? We'll share these with you, and I invite you to consider these norms in your own school communities. Vulnerability is not a popular topic when I'm usually meeting with a group of leaders. I think it's because we think we're supposed to actually know more than we probably have to know, as long as we're willing to collaborate. Brené Brown says, to show up and be seen when you cannot control the outcome, that is the definition of vulnerability. Put your hand up if you like a little bit of control. I'm glad there were some honest people in the room. It's uncomfortable when you're in a leadership position, you're serving however many hundreds of people, and you know that people are looking at you, and you don't have control. You gotta lean in because, as Brené Brown says, lean in because you don't have control. And I wanted to share with you something from my own experience, because this vulnerability thing we talk about, but maybe we don't actually give examples for. I know, even though you see me up here speaking the way I am, that when I'm talking about experiences that are not mine, I begin to be afraid, whether I'm talking about anti-black racism or anti-Semitism or indigenous ways of being and knowing, it's not my experience. And I start finding myself getting stressed, wanting to find the right words, afraid that I'm going to offend, and worry that if I don't get this right, something bad is going to happen. I'm sharing that with you as honestly as I can when I stand up in these podiums in front of you. That is part of my experience. I'm guessing some, maybe more of you feel the same way. And that's why I think that this quote really struck me this summer, because it is about leaning in with one another and asking, I need help. I need help to understand how to speak. I need help understanding what will be a good way to connect. The humanity of our leadership is key. My closing comments connects to the question I put out on Twitter about what should I be sharing at this meeting. And what I really appreciated about what I learned from over 200 responses is that it seldom talked about the technical knowledge we need to have. It seldom talked about the standards we need to fulfill. It seldom talked about the expectations and so forth that are important. And by the way, all of that stuff is important. But this is what every tweet spoke about. Who are we as leaders? What do we bring as leaders? How do we communicate as leaders? How do we relate to our staffs, to our communities as leaders? And what do we emphasize when we speak in our communities? I so much appreciated that what we were invited to consider is how we lead. Not the what, but the how of that leadership. Trust. When people feel they are trusted, they spoke about taking risks, being willing to go further. Humility, understanding that we in the position of leadership do not drive everything. Presence, physical presence, in hallways, in classrooms, in the community, not simply through email, not in the office alone. The word care came up more than any other term in that Twitter feed. Humor, the importance of relationships, empathy and compassion, support, courage, celebration, belonging, authenticity, communication. I just wanted to share those terms so that we could reflect for a moment on what those who we are leading with believe is most important that we bring. And I trust that as we think about the new school year, we can reflect on some of these key traits that are probably the reason you are a leader in TDSB. And of course, it is in a culture of high expectations. Our students must succeed. That is our responsibility. All students. Excellence for all. Removing any barriers that block that. I love this one. And don't forget to get enough sleep. I don't want any comments from my team about this one because I still will send you an email at 2, just don't read it until 7 in the morning. This tweet I just wanted to share in its entirety from A. Brizard. Encourage curiosity. Curiosity leads to learning. Encourage vulnerability. Vulnerability leads to courage. Encourage authenticity. Authenticity leads to acceptance. Encourage fearlessness. Fearlessness leads to opportunity. Encourage dreaming. Dreaming leads to passion. I found that to be very powerful, and I just wanted to share it with you as she wrote it to us through social media. And this comment from Kim Scott, who speaks about feedback, giving feedback, she says, radical candor is about caring personally and challenging directly. If we want to bring about change behavior, change practice, if we need to interrupt or transform, we need to care and we need to be direct. An art form that I think is so worth paying attention to. Our challenge. We're leading in challenging times. I'm betting if we were speaking to any leader at any time in history, they would speak to their challenging times. We are at a unique and important place in the Toronto District School Board regarding our multi-year strategic plan and our vision for learning. In the context that is provincial, in the context that is local, we've got some really significant commitments to fulfill. Our opportunity. We change lives. We change lives when we do this work in the way we've been discussing. Our commitment. Each and every student will succeed. I am so confident as I look around this room that together, no matter what comes, we will have an amazing year in 1920. I give you my word on behalf of the senior team who is here, and I'm grateful to them as well, that we will listen, we will partner, we will collaborate to do this work together. And I want to end by saying how I started. Your leadership matters so much. Thank you for putting yourself out there. Thank you for leaning in. Thank you for being courageous. And let's also have some fun this year too, because being around students is probably one of the most joyful opportunities we have. All the best.